Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. I am your host, Rashida Green, and this is the show for and about environmental justice and those who fight the fight with skin as melanated as the days are long. Knowledge is power, and we are breaking down stereotypes one episode at a time. Let's start the show. As I often forget, but now I'm doing a better job of remembering, we are going to get started by giving some flowers. And the person that I want to give flowers to today is Harriet Washington. She is a Black science writer and editor and a professor of bioethics at Columbia University. She's written several books, including A Mind is a Terrible Thing to Waste, Environmental Racism and Its Assault on the American Mind, and the book I am currently reading, Medical Apartheid. And that book explores the history and mistreatment of enslaved Africans and their descendants at the hands of medical professionals. Yeah. I'm actually looking for some people who want to get together and discuss this book. Either I will plan to discuss it on the show or ask some of my podcast sisters to weigh in or chime in. We haven't quite figured it out yet, but if this is something that interests you, and if you have a personal medical story you'd like to tell, or if you want to talk about your own read of this book, or read it with me if you feel like it. I'm about 60 pages in right now, and I have to take breaks. Gonna be honest about it. I have to take a pause to kind of absorb what I've been reading. So if anyone wants to go on this very slow and painful journey with me, feel free. You can email me at rashida@allroadscross.com. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by the Black Podcast Collective. If you are a Black creative looking for a place to network with like minds and get support for your work, then look no further. The Black Pod Collective offers tips for business and marketing with their amazing podcast series. They host networking opportunities to make those necessary connections happen. And for more information, please visit blkpodcollective.com or follow them on Instagram at blkpodcollective. In this episode, this is another case study episode, and we are going to be talking about a dangerous group of chemicals and their impact that they are having on us in this country, but also in the world. I actually introduce PFAS in the hot dam episode about the Michigan dam that collapsed and the groundwater contamination. So let's get into it. Let's talk about some PFAS. So PFAS, PFAS, that's perfluoroalkyl substances, or polyfluoroalkyl substances. Woo, come on, organic chemistry. And they were previously referred to as perfluorochemicals, or PFOs. And they are a group of fluoropolymers. So let's pull over. When you think about polymers, just think about poly, which is multiple, right? So it's just long ass chains. And in this particular case, they're carbon chains with fluoride molecules attached to them. It just, if you Google it, it just looks like a bunch of C's with some F's sticking off of it. Easy peasy. There you go. That's organic chemistry. Woo! I'm telling you, I'm going to go back to school again for organic chemistry and then teach this stuff and like do on some stand and deliver type shit. Anyway, so those are fluoropolymers, and they are used, this group have been used for clothing, furniture, adhesives, food packaging, insulation of electrical wires. So PFAS as a group are used in literally everything. You're going to hear this as I go on, but I just wanted to let you know that what I just named are some of the places they show up, and I'm going to continue to elaborate on those that were named, but they are in everything. So we're going to get back on the road now. So we've talked about what PFAS are, and there's also there's going to be several different types that I'm going to specifically talk about. And I am going to name them, and it's going to be a struggle for all of us. But the good thing is that I'll just be using the acronyms for the most part going forward, unless I need to spell it out. But what you should know about this is that this is a large group of chemicals that are man-made. Continuing on, the group of PFAS also includes polyfluoroalkyl sulfonic acid, or PFOS, and perfluorooctanoic acid, or PFOA. So PFOS and PFOA, you're going to hear these two particular compounds, you're going to hear me say these multiple times. And companies like 3M and DuPont refer to PFOA as C8, and that's just really because there's six carbon atoms. But it's shorter, it doesn't sound as dangerous or as terrible, right? C8. What's wrong with that? Sounds like V8. And the reason that I bring these particular chemicals up, and the reason that I'm bringing 3M and DuPont into the conversation as well, getting to why the chemicals first, is that they don't break down in the natural environment. And when we're talking about the natural environment, we're talking about the water and the soil and the air, right? And they can contaminate water sources, and they contaminate by bioaccumulation, which basically means they build up. So this group of chemicals are accumulating in fish, which also means that they're accumulating in wildlife, which also means they're accumulating in us. And at least 12 PFAS have been found in the blood serum of people ages 12 and older since 1999, according to the CDC. Now, the CDC also alleges that the levels of PFAS in our blood system, or the blood serum that was tested, doesn't necessarily cause adverse health risks. Yeah. But PFAS have been used by the 3M Corporation in practically everything from the 1940s until the 2000s. Some more items that I didn't name earlier: hamburger wrappers, microwave popcorn bags, non-stick cookware, which we will come back to, and they have been tested and found to be in the bloodstream of 99% of Americans. This is based on updated data. And again, we are going to break that bitch down too. PFAS are called the forever chemical. And I think that was a term that was coined by the Environmental Working Group. And you're going to hear me talk about them a lot too. It's going to be a lot of stuff today. So science, as I mentioned, is showing that PFAS are causing damage. They are linked to cancer. They are called a carcinogen, or being classified as a carcinogen, or should be classified as a carcinogen. They cause liver damage, thyroid disease, decreased fertility, high cholesterol, hormone suppression. There have been more than 4,000 PFAS identified in literature. And the previous research done by the EPA, because we're going to bring them into the conversation too, and the Environmental Working Group that I just named, underestimated originally the number of Americans that were exposed. And that's why they came out with the new facts that say that all of us, basically, except for a very small percentage, have PFAS in our blood system right now. And the EWG, as I'm going to start to call them from now on, really found that PFAS were widespread in rainwater and found in major water supplies in the U.S. They took tap water samples from 44 different places in 31 states and DC, and there was only one place where they didn't find any PFAS. Some of the areas where they found the most were Miami, Philly, New Orleans, and New Jersey suburbs. And I will provide the link to this particular research so that you guys can see it, because in the actual report, it includes a breakdown of the specific places, because the places sound so vague, but the specific cities and towns where they went to test the tap water there. Let's shift gears and talk about the laws. So the first law that I want to bring up is the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. So I've talked about this one before too, but we're going to bring it on around because nothing helps things stick in your mind like repetition. So this was the first federal law mandating public drinking water standards in 1974. Woo! And this particular law applies to every public drinking water system in the U.S. with the exception of private wells. And if you go back and listen to the hot dam episode, I kind of touch on why that's kind of a problem, but it's cool. This law also states that there should be a source water assessment program for public drinking water and a plan that outlines the boundaries of the areas and where the source water is coming from that feeds into the public water systems, identifying regulated and unregulated contaminants in the outlined area, and let the peoples know if the water is contaminated. It also included mandated maximum contaminant levels. And that is the maximum level of contamination allowable. Now, this particular piece is important for what the next bit of legislation that I'm going to talk about. But just to kind of let you know, that maximum contaminant level takes time to assess. So what's going on in the meantime? Okay. In February of 2019, the EPA issued a PFAS action plan to assess water, waste, remediation activities, toxicity reporting, general reports of PFAS contamination. The areas of emphasis in this plan are drinking water, site cleanup, enforcement, monitoring, research, and communication. So it passed in January of 2020. Don't get too excited though. And it included PFAS, specifically PFOA and PFOS, and adding those to the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, or CERLA. I don't think it's CERLA. It's sort of like CERCLA. Sure, CERCLA. That sounds weird. But it's also known as the Superfund Law. And by adding PFOA and PFOS to this particular act, it would designate them as Superfund sites for cleanup. So that addresses cleanup, which, as I named, is part of this action plan. And as I mentioned earlier about the maximum contaminant level, so the EPA, as part of this plan, is required to establish MCLs for PFOA and PFOS in drinking water within 2 years. Yeah. And also, in addition to this action plan, there's also amendments that have to be made to specific laws like the Clean Air Act, and also like the CERCLA that I named as well, the Superfund Law, and that also had to be amended as well. But as I mentioned, don't get too excited about this because the bill is probably not going to pass as it is, and it also just might get vetoed altogether by you-know-who. There's also the National Defense Authorization Act for 2020, which added 14 PFAS to the toxic release inventory, right? Isn't that awesome? Yeah, some states very much so disagree, and they don't care about what the EPA is trying to do right now. They're not trying to hear that because it's not fast enough. So there are 17 states that have formal policies to address PFAS in various ways. And for context, the EPA has known about the presence of PFAS in the drinking water since 2001. I know 2001 very well. And I know that it was not last year. I know that, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind. They've known about this level of this particular group of chemicals being present in the drinking water since 2001. All right. So some of the things that the states are trying to do to address the issues, are creating stricter rules for the maximum contaminant level. So the EPA's maximum contaminant level is 70 parts per trillion. That's the amount of particles that can be present, which is very high and a lot higher than 7 states set theirs. And again, this is one of those resources that I encourage folks to read, and I encourage you to take some tally and inventory about the states that you're hearing that I'm going to mention are actually in the process of working on these things. So the 7 states that have developed stricter guidelines are Alaska, California, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, and Vermont. The 2019 PFAS action law included guidelines for the use of PFAS in foam, and in this case specifically firefighting foam. Washington State, Kentucky, New York, and Connecticut prohibit the use of PFAS in firefighting foam. In the area of food packaging, the state of Washington, Kentucky, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Vermont have taken steps to prohibit PFAS in food packaging. As I mentioned, it can be found in food packaging, hamburger wrappers. Washington State, Florida, Vermont, and California are working on reporting the discharges of PFAS and also if it's showing up and its use in specific products. Oregon is requiring its health authority to establish and maintain a list of designated high priority chemicals of concern in kids' toys, kids' products. California and Michigan are increasing their surveillance and monitoring of their water systems. So again, where does your state fall into that? Put a pin in that. So these are the states that are making efforts and making steps to inform the public and also monitor PFAS in their drinking water. The Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company began in 1902 in Two Harbors, Minnesota. I have to say, I feel very much so like I am giving Minnesota, the state of Minnesota, such a hard way to go. Like, but I love y'all. Like, when I thought about Minnesota, like prior to all of this stuff, I really just thought about Prince and mint condition. And I was content. I was like, man, they're doing it up there. All right. But because it just seems, okay, all right. Like, I feel like I'm just picking, and I'm not. I didn't know there was so much going on up there. Whew. All right. So, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing. Mine for anorthosite, which is an igneous rock used to make sandpaper. The company moved to Duluth, Minnesota in 1905 and constructed a 2-story sandpaper plant. In the 1910s, the company created a plant in St. Paul and made the 3M abrasive cloth. And basically, they called it something clever like 3Mite. It's fine. And this was the first product that 3M, as they would later adopt, they created this first product and it did really well. And with the sales of the 3Mite abrasive cloth and the sales from World War I, the company started to make some profits. In 1925, a 3M lab scientist invented masking tape, which was, as we know, a huge success and eventually became Scotch tape. And Scotch obviously is a brand name. In 1930, this same scientist invented Scotch cellophane tape, and it was used during the Great Depression to mend book pages and documents. In 1939, the snail handheld tape dispenser, that black thing, was made. And we're fast forwarding to the 1990s because we don't have time for all this memory lane, right? 3M was creating privacy computer filters, flexible foam bandages, tape strips, and dispensers. By 2004, 3M sales had topped $20 billion. Oh, wow. What a glorious story of like hard work and perseverance and like, being at the right place at the right time and, up by the boots and all the things, right? All the things. Yeah, but for real, like, let's talk about like what was also going on during all the wonder years. So also in between these glorious moments and awesome things that 3M was doing. So let's go back in time again to 1947, which is when 3M began producing PFOA. So just in case you forgot this long, ridiculous name, it's perfluorooctanoic acid. And they created this by fluorination. Adding the F's to the C's, girl. That's all it is. It's more than that, but I'm simplifying. In the 1950s, 3M expanded worldwide. They had operations in Canada, Mexico, France, Germany, Australia, and the United Kingdom. And in 1951, DuPont started purchasing PFOA from 3M for the use and the manufacturing of Teflon, a product that, as we know, made DuPont rich AF. And they had really turned a profit by the 90s. And as I mentioned before, DuPont doesn't refer to PFOA as it is. They call it C8. By the 1970s, 3M had evidence that the compounds that they were using affected the immune system. In 1993, there was proof that goats passed PFOS to their offspring through their milk. In 1998, a discovery was made that PFOS was found in some eagles. In the eagles. And in the year 2000, 3M gave the EPA hundreds of documents that it had withheld, right? That showed that the PFAS had spread into the groundwater and then the drinking water and into human beings and animals and plants and the food system, and that it was still there because this, as I might have mentioned, and maybe I didn't, PFAS don't break down. I think I did say that. They don't, because I know I'm on top of it. I know I said that. Yeah, they don't break down. Oh yeah, I had kombucha this morning. I'm ready to rock. Okay. So since the year, and I said that, right? Since the year 2000. So you just add one more year. Maybe they use that time to like read through everything. But the fact is, for no less than 18 years, the EPA knew what was up. Continuing on in this very depressing timeline here. In 2005, 3M placed some of their documents under seal because they were having a lawsuit over PFAS contamination in Minnesota. They were also, the following year in 2006, they got another lawsuit, or 1.5 million in penalties for 244 violations of the Toxic Substance Control Act. I mean, and the list goes on and on. And by 2018, February of 2018, 3M settled a suit for $850 million. And they had to admit that they acted with, and this is a direct quote, acted with a deliberate disregard for the high risk of injury to the citizens and wildlife of Minnesota. This was, and this is the state where they set up shop all over the effing place. I was about to say a bad word and I caught myself. Okay, so I stopped off on the happy trail for 3M when they made $20 billion, but I had to emphasize it. And going back again, I'm sorry, I have to go back again just to remind you, the EPA knew about this. 3M and DuPont knew about this for ample time. And did you know about it? I'm just, okay. Oh boy. So breathing deep, I think we've more than come to the crossroads, right? And I want to talk about Teflon because that's a brand name once again. And we all know We know that term, Teflon. And that is actually, the chemical itself is polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE. I know I have probably taxed y'all's nerves with all these acronyms. I apologize. But it doesn't react, right? The reason that it's Teflon and why it's non-stick, that's what you hear. And that's literally because this is a non-reactive compound. So the food can slip right off. And PTFE is man-made, just like PFOA is, just like PFAS are. And PFOA is used to synthesize or make this chemical, PTFE, that we know as Teflon, but again, just the brand. And I've talked about some of the health risks that have been found. I've also mentioned that there are thousands of these PFAS all over the place. In the course of this conversation, I've highlighted maybe 3: PFOS, PFOA, and now PTFE, but there are thousands of them. And yes, with your nonstick pans, under extreme heat or under high heat, chemicals can be released in the air. They're also being released when you wash them. And we've talked about, the water cycle, and when you're washing dishes, when you're doing any of the things, when you're draining, when your sink doesn't drain, you're pouring Drano down. We've talked about where all those chemicals are ending back up. And I didn't throw this into the conversation, but PFAS are also used on water-resistant clothing. Like, think about it. Think about all those Ford Tough dudes with the Gore-Tex jackets and all that jazz. There's a chemical that is being used to repel that water. And in talking about all of these things, we know that there is no other way for these chemicals to go or end up but into the water and into the soil. And, I brought up these companies like 3M and like DuPont, and also how the EPA yet again failed us. They failed us. And then there's also the impact of PFAS globally, because as I talked about in the water cycle, this isn't just a cycle hovering over America. This is all over the world. This is global. So getting into some of that global impact, I invite you to look or think about the Tibetan Plateau. It's an elevated plateau in Central and East Asia. It's home to the Himalayan mountains, the world's tallest mountain range. It has rivers, lakes, grasslands, forests. It's a vast ecosystem. However, due to global warming, the lakes in the area are getting larger and the glaciers are melting. And studies on glacial ice, rain, runoff, all that flow into the Namco Basin contain PFAS. And there is the Earth has a cryosphere. And I have never talked about the cryosphere on this show, and I can make some time to do that and go more into depth. But for right now, think about it just as a reservoir for pollutants. Most of the cryosphere, and also the way I like to think about it too, because again, I'm a whole nerd, is like the cryogenic ice blocks in Demolition Man. Boom, done. All right, anyway. So most of the cryosphere is located in the Arctic, the Antarctic, and the Tibetan Plateau. And these are areas where there are what's called persistent organic pollutants. And these can be trapped in the cryosphere, but also they're able to travel long distances. So a lot of these chemicals are what's referred to as legacy chemicals, which means they've been around for a long time, and some of them are held in the cryosphere. And in the Tibetan Plateau, with its proximity to India, there's traces of the chemical DDT, and with the manufacturing of PFAS shifting from the West and the US and coming over into Asian countries, the Tibetan Plateau has a high presence of PFAS. And there is a really excellent report, a Chinese-based report, that shows that melting glaciers are a secondary source of PFAS, and they increase the likelihood of contaminating fresh water sources. And I, honestly speaking, I could probably do an entire episode about that subject, because again, of the Tibetan Plateau is so important, and houses so much different life, but it's under attack. It's under threat. It's because of global warming, the glaciers are melting. And as I mentioned actually on the last episode, where I talked about the flooding of coastal cities, the Tibetan Plateau is exactly what I'm talking about. So for those who, because people asked me or wanted to know more about climate change, and the glaciers melting and the changes and the shifts, that's climate change. That is not normal. And we are seeing the impacts of this. And full stop on that. This is an example of climate change. So what can we do? I mean, for God's sake, what can we do? Well, first, circling back to the states that are doing what they're supposed to be doing. Again, if you didn't hear your state, you need to go ask them what's up. Because the PFAS aren't just in the states that I named that are getting their standards for their drinking water in place, the MCLs and all that. They're not the only states that have this problem, okay? But they're the only states that are doing anything about it. And so, what's going on? Like, I would be asking your state representatives, like, what the tea is, because they need to be able to tell you what their standards are going to be for their MCLs. They need to be able to tell you how they plan to monitor the water for possible sources of contamination, and how they plan to report that information to you. Okay? Second, there are options out there for treating drinking water for PFAS contamination. However, it's not free or cheap, all right? There are granular activated carbon, and there actually are activated carbon filters. And I looked really quickly. They sell them on Amazon and at Home Depot, if you want to check those places out. But getting back, there's also reverse osmosis and ion exchange. And those three are the most common methods right now for removing PFAS from the water. Like I mentioned, the granular activated carbon is the most popular, and it's actually in use in some water treatment facilities. So if you want to know if your particular water treatment facility is using these filters, you can ask them, email them, call them. Call them, girl. Tweet them. They're online. If you live in DC, tweet the DC Water. Ask them. I think they do. I think in my research, I found that they might have that, but I don't know. Verify it. Get in their face. Ask them what's going on. Are you using all the methods that you can to track and monitor and remove PFAS from the drinking water? There are downsides, of course. And also, not every facility or every area can use the same kinds of treatments. It depends on the concentration of the PFAS in your water. There's a lot of factors. So this has to be thought through, is the point. And also, reverse osmosis is expensive for the long term and requires a lot of water. And the wastewater from the treatment has to be disposed. And GAC and ion exchange waste has to be incinerated, which can also have an impact on the local health too. So again, not perfect. Another thing that you can do, organizations like the Environmental Working Group has tools and resources available on their website. And they recommend the use of reverse osmosis treatment if you suspect your water might be contaminated. Okay? And I'll put links to this stuff in the show notes. I will tag them on social media. Please follow them. The Environmental Working Group really helped me to bring all this information together. But anyway, so also another thing I would recommend is use water filters for your tap water. Just do that. I mean, I know you hear, oh girl, our water is so safe. Oh my God, I give my dogs a bath in it. They bathe in it. Oh, they love it. I know that that's very tempting to believe people. But yeah, like don't do that. So like use filters, right? Use filters. Use the filters. And I would definitely look into the reverse osmosis or the activated carbon filters for your home use too. So these are just some of the solutions that I think are the most available right now, but especially, again, I want to drive the first point home and make sure that, you are hammering it home to your representatives. If you didn't hear your state called, if I didn't name your state as out there on the front lines trying to get the answers, then you know what you need to do. Or you need to get it with a group that's already doing it, throw them a couple dollars, or get out or use your phone and tweet, all that. Get all up on that. Okay. Moving to the shout outs. So first and foremost, as I already mentioned, shout out to the Environmental Working Group, okay? They have been doing this research and providing this data to the public about all measures and forms of environmental impact. And I reference them, as you heard, throughout this show. Please follow them on social media. They have offices in DC, California, and Minnesota, and visit their website, ewg.org. Also, shout out to Life After Release. They had a really great webinar on July 4th about abolition. It was Abolition 101, and we talked about what abolition is and came up with our own idea of what an abolitionist, really a community-based public safety, and just not just public safety, but just a community based in the principles of abolition, how that would look. And I plan to share my thoughts on that in an upcoming episode. You can follow them on Twitter and Instagram. And I think it's Life After Release. And again, I'll tag them on social media as well. But please check out Life After Release. And also shout out to We Act, who is devoted to informing and advocating for low-income and people of color communities on issues of environmental justice. Follow and support them. They provide the much-needed information to folks in New York. You can follow them on Instagram at WeAct4EJ. And last, but certainly not least, shout out to the 2020 graduates of Antioch University, myself included. Round of applause to the graduates, as I like to call them, the kings and queens of pivot. Everybody in 2020, congratulations if you have graduated already. Congratulations if you plan to graduate in December. Godspeed. Your hard work and dedication are what this world needs. And that wraps up another episode of the Crossroads Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Crossroads Pod C1, which is weird, but you can also follow me on the Instagrams, at Crossroads Podcast, or on TikTok. I'm sorry, it's mostly because it's ridiculous, but I still say it. Okay, so if you want to follow me on TikTok because you've got nothing better to do with your time, go for it. Crossroads Podcast, all one word. All right, and you can visit me you can't visit me personally, but you can visit my website, allroadscross.com. If you have any questions about any of the things that you heard during this episode, please feel free to reach out to me. And again, as a reminder, if you want to read Medical Apartheid, or if you want to share a personal medical related story of your own, or maybe a relative, sharing for a relative, you can email me, Rashida@allroadscross.com. And I'll see you at the crossroads.